Yeah, there's another.
Yeah, she sent me an email. So we're, yeah. And budget for next year's budget parameters, or is it the?
It's the parameters and how that's gonna play in.
Hey, how are you? Welcome. Congratulations. Yeah, congratulations. I'm excited to work with you too.
This is too easy. Budget parameters and how that's gonna inform the, at least the how it's gonna, I think it, I know.
Okay.
As long as you had a good time. My cheese in there.
I think Keith went to go check. I think she went to the restroom, but we have a quorum. I texted, yeah, we have 5 y'all. Yeah, we are. I'm waiting on leadership.
Good afternoon, everyone. We will now call the November 4th, 2019 board meeting to order. Mr. Gaither, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. Representing Educational District 2, Ms. Loretta Balden.
Present.
Representing Educational District 3, Ms. Michelle Olympiades.
Present.
Representing Educational District 6 and Board Vice Chair, Ms. Ishay Collins.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 7, Ms. Candace Wood Jackson. Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 8, Ms. Cynthia Briscoe Brown.
Present.
Madam Vice Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. I will now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the October 7th board meeting.
So moved.
I have a motion. There's a second. The motion has been seconded. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the November 4th board meeting agenda? I have a motion and seconded by Cynthia Briscoe Brown. The motion has been seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Dr. Kostarfin, would you please bring the work session items?
Yes, Ms. Vice Chair, we have 5 presentations today. We will begin with the members or some members of the Superintendent's Community Equity Advisory Committee, which has been set up in part by the board policy. Of course, we just started our work on this, but they're here for presenting to you just a check-in on the work. We do not have a formal report as we have not completed an entire year. Next, at the request of the board, Sky Duckett, our Chief Human Resources Officer, will provide a report on the district's processes for teacher hiring, retention, and promotion. Following her, Erica Long, Senior Policy and Government Affairs Advisor, will provide an update on the 2020 legislative priorities for the district. Angela King-Smith, the Chief Engagement Officer, will give you an update on the development of the strategic plan from 2020 to 2025. And finally, Lisa Bracken, the Chief Financial Officer, will provide a fiscal year 2020 general fund monthly financial update, including student activity funds, and a presentation of the draft parameters and calendar for the fiscal year 2021 budget. For our first presentation, would Ms. Jessica Johnson and Valerie Williams please join us at the podium to provide the equity check-in to the board. And is Erica Long joining?
Yes, I'm going
Oh, okay.
to offer my assistance as well.
Oh, that's right, because Mr. Amos couldn't be here for, he had a delay in travel. Got it. So thank you for filling in for Mr. Amos. It's nice to see you, Ms. Williams. We'll turn it over to the two of you.
First of all, I'm Valerie Williams, and I want to thank the board and Dr. Kostarfin for this opportunity to serve on this committee. I do want the board to know that this work has just begun and that we need to continue this work with intentionality and whatever we need to do to put a budget for this particular item.
We started today's presentation with key excerpts from the equity policy that you all will remember passing this past April, where we wanted to pull out the language that serves as a guidepost for us as we complete this, as we start this equity work, particularly language around the various factors impacting our students and how they lead to inequities in student achievement. We thought it was important to highlight those here in the presentation itself.
The excerpts to conclude, the board directs the superintendent to factor equity into all the district does, including the district shall remedy the practices to lead to the disproportionate representation of students of color in areas such as special education and discipline and assignments to alternative schools, and two, the underrepresentation of students of color in the gifted and talented education program and advanced studies. In addition, the district shall identify and address any barriers to equity that results from school governance structure. The district shall create robust cluster and school-based communications plan. The district commits to work aggressively towards equity in allocations and resources. The district will work aggressively to ensure that every classroom and every school has high-quality teachers and principals. And some of the things that we wanted to discuss about some of those excerpts are the disproportionate and disparity in partnerships. You may see that if you have the PowerPoint slide, that we also want to talk about the disproportionate and inequities in partnership disparity within a cluster. Another thing that we wanted to talk about is when the district spends money on brick and mortar as opposed to children. You know, there's a difference between the funding for that.
Thank you for that point, Ms. Williams. The committee has discussed how though the district has made a lot of strides with respect to our facilities and equity across the district, that they want to make sure that there are also equitable allocation of instructional resources, and that we're very intentional about making sure that our more experienced teachers are where they are needed the most. Here's a list of our esteemed Community Advisory Committee members.
Trinity Lewis, Educational District 1, Valerie Williams, Interim District 2, Morna Francis, District 3, Beth Hamilton, District 4, Brian Marks, District 5, Jessica Johnson, District 6, Byron Amos, at large 7, Tom Dunn, at large 8, Miriam Archibong, at large seat 9, Erica Long is the Senior Advisor, and Tommy Usher is the Associate Superintendent.
Since we're implementing your new equity policy, we thought it would be important to communicate to the public where we are in each step of that work. We have completed the establishment of a Community Equity Advisory Committee, and strategic decision-making with equity is in progress in various parts of the district's work. Our Equity Advisory Committee has participated in strategic planning work. They will work on the FY 2021 budget along with your budget process, as well as facilities master planning work and getting an update on academic indicators and student performance.
In progress, in conjunction with the beginning of the FY 2021 budget process and in alignment with the 2020-2025 strategic planning process, the board and administration will begin to build and plan to ensure that all students are being provided equitable access to excellent education opportunities.
And that is with respect to the biennial equity plan that you have directed us to develop. The development of annual equity goals, however, will start after you have approved the next strategic plan. The idea is that as a board, you will decide on a strategic direction for the district that will be used to inform our annual equity goals.
We thank you for your listening, and we thank you for the opportunity to serve.
Questions?
Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions? Michelle?
I'm sorry, would you mind just walking me through this timeline one more time? We're not going to, just walk me through it one more time before I make an assumption of what I heard.
Okay. So we started with the establishment of the Community Equity Advisory Committee.
Right.
That is meeting quarterly through the end of this school year, and we'll restart that cycle next school year. That committee is currently working on strategic decision-making with respect to the strategic plan, facilities master planning, the FY 2021 budget, as well as responding to and receiving academic indicator information. We have begun the process for building out a biennial equity plan, but that must be aligned to the next strategic plan. You will, of course, know all of the big picture decisions that the board is currently making, so it only makes sense to put in place a 2-year equity plan when we have strategic direction to the administration from the board through that 2020 through 2025 strategic plan.
Thank you.
Today is the first of the annual equity presentations. Next November, this time next year, you'll have a more substantive presentation on equity work that has happened within the foregoing year. The development of annual equity goals is a part of the superintendent evaluation process that will begin with the SY 2020 through 2021 superintendent process.
Okay, thank you. I guess, so from now until next November, or let's just say, we're working on the strategic plan and you're meeting quarterly, is that my understanding? So what are your buckets for the next 4 quarters, if that's fair to say? I'm looking for a little bit more clarity on how are we developing our lens with respect to equity? And then with the lens right here, how are we going to start I need more coffee. Start putting some operations underneath that, and I just hesitate that we would wait a whole year to see some of that. So I'm kind of curious to know what those 4 buckets are, if you don't mind walking me through that.
Thank you. There's plenty of work happening, even now, so please don't have the impression that there's not equity work happening until next November. Thank you, Pierre.
Sorry.
We have scheduled those quarterly meetings. In December, the Equity Committee will hear from and respond to the academic indicators so that they can put an equity lens on information about how our students are performing across the district. We're also at the early stages of engaging with a facilitator who can offer more in-depth information about bias training and really helping to craft the lens even of this community committee. The committee will also be a part of the FY 2021 budget development process. You will remember that the equity policy very explicitly calls out that our budgeting and our allocation of resources must be done in an equitable manner. So that means that we have to build into our budgeting work for the Equity Advisory Committee to do. Same with facilities master planning. As we are working, as the board is working, as the administration is working to make long-term plans for the use and development of our facilities, there is an equity role in that as well. So that's all work that's happening even as we await the new strategic plan from the board.
Okay, so just to be clear, so the implicit bias, I think, is a good one to start with. Are we doing things now where we're going to start that training moving forward?
We're working to identify, did you?
Yes.
Yeah, so here, we've been working on equity for over 5 years, so let me
Yep.
just be really clear. In order, the biggest piece of your equity work is within your student success funding formula, which has been established for 2 years now. So that's number one. So that's the equity work prior to the adoption of this policy that we are still doing refining and making better, which y'all just did a couple of days ago. We are still addressing disproportionality in special education, which I think you mentioned. The turnaround strategy is another piece of equity where we were focusing on schools with high numbers of kids in poverty, socioeconomic challenges related to what it meant to get them everything from wraparound services to better leaders to stronger teachers, student discipline through social emotional learning, restorative practices, and making sure that we're investing in the whole child, which was part of the equity issues that were raised. I mentioned the wraparound services, but we went a step further. We work with people on housing stability, mental health and physical health, food deserts, community partnerships around play spaces and clean spaces. And then we've done a lot in recent years to continue beyond the general SPLOST work, which was mentioned earlier, but everything from weight rooms, playgrounds, 21st century space for STEM, are all examples of what we've been talking about in the equity task force. So that work continues. The lift that I think we're talking about in this equity policy that we all have to wrestle with is the equity in all that you do and how that gets represented. So it has, if you look on slide 3, when it talks about disproportionality for students of color, yes, it's, in assignment and special ed and discipline, but you're looking at other areas like advanced studies and gifted and talented. But I would argue that we would be going a step deeper when you're looking at the achievement gap that continues, to be large and need, significant investments of time, people, and money. So those are the areas that we have already been working on, but will, again, need to be expanded in this conversation about all that we do and how that's represented. There will be details like preparing agenda items for the meeting, and like we have a fiscal impact statement at the end. You'll probably want an equity impact statement. And if so, what does that look like? What is the guidance? And so part of the training that the task force is doing is about them understanding that and then coupling that with the work that we're doing inside the administration, where we have an internal team constantly working through issues of equity and bringing their training and work on the front lines together with the bigger aspirational work, but then mission-driven work of the task force. And so those two things are kind of coming together, but we haven't quite made it there. But we're working to use the same facilitator, the same expertise that the administration is using to help us kind of keep the work in alignment. But you're right, we don't want to get ahead of the strategic plan, but there's tons of work that happens in real time and that will need to be considered for this immediate budget around equity that you're able to afford, and then set up your next big step, moving forward. But that is going to take time, and I know that we, like the policy says, we do need a full academic year to solidify that in a way that's coherent, that people understand, and when they're implementing, they really do understand what we're saying and what we're trying to get out of the equity work. But those are several areas that we're currently working on that the task force considers and talks about as part of their work.
Thank you for the detailed explanation.
I have a question, and just in regards, I guess, what support looks like for the task force as all of these things are happening, but the meetings are, like the next meeting won't be until December 4th. There will be a lot of work that's been done between, September, December. Then, of course, March 11th would be the budget work. That, there's a lot, to Dr. C's point, there's a lot that is happening. So is there any kind of strategy or, conversation amongst the committee about, appointees or having, having some individuals being able to be present at some of those meetings, just to at least be able to kind of be in the thick of the work versus the report out or things like that?
So our approach to that is that they actually participate like everybody else in stakeholder groups. So even for strategic planning, we brought in the strategy management people to talk to them based from just the perspective of equity in the strategic planning process. Many of our committee members do attend and show up to events, but everything that we're doing in the district this year, we are bringing to the task force for them to specifically look at, just focused on equity. And when we go out in the community, there's a lot of other things that people talk about, but the idea is to have them facilitated with the way that everybody else is, but using the equity focus as their part of the conversation to influence strategic planning, conversations about achievement gaps, the resources for the budget, and facility master planning as just 4 to 5 of the examples.
Board Member Collins, I just want to say that, and the task force members are very engaged already in all different aspects of the other part of the meetings that go on strategic planning, facility plannings. We are already at those meetings doing those things. So when we do come to the equity meeting, we are already, abreast of some of the things that are going on. Is that all? Any more questions? Y'all know I'm with this.
So thank y'all for your service.
Okay.
It's been a great task force. People are working hard, and in between the meetings, just so you know, they are meeting with us, helping us shape things like this, and giving us constant feedback. And they're studying a lot. We have a lot of studies and research that we look at, and that's distributed to them for their consideration as part of our conversations as well.
Lots and lots of links.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate all your work.
Our next presenter is Sky Duckett. This is a board member, Ms. Wood Jackson, down in talent management, specifically on the process for teacher hiring, retention, Oh, sorry, my thing wasn't on. Board member request, Candace Wood Jackson, and it's a drill down on talent management, looking specifically at the processes for teacher hiring, retention, promotion, and evaluation.
All right. Good afternoon, Board Chair Estevez, Vice Chair Collins, Superintendent Karstafen, and members of the board. Special welcome to Ms. Bolden. It's good to see you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide information about some of our important work today. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of our processes for hiring, retaining, promoting, and evaluating teachers. By the end, you should have an understanding of these processes at a high level, with more information available in the appendix. This work is guided by an overarching talent strategy that began as one of 4 pillars of our 5-year strategic plan back in 2015. Our theory of action still remains the same. If we partner with schools to recruit, develop, and retain highly effective educators, then they will grow in their professional practice so that our students will graduate college and career ready. I provide an update on the initiatives shown here within the talent strategy each May. But as a reminder, this is a joint effort between Schools and Academics Office and Human Resources. There are 3 primary objectives, which are about defining excellent teaching, recruiting, hiring, and supporting employees to excel, and rewarding, recognizing, and retaining those who meet and exceed expectations. Today, I'll go a little deeper than before and outline some of the processes that support the success of these initiatives. To provide as much information as possible in a short amount of time, I'm going to tell you about our processes from the perspective of a teacher, Kelvin. He is an experienced teacher who's planning to move to Atlanta. You can see here how we advertise our jobs and how social media is intentionally used in the recruitment process. Being mobile friendly is also very important to us. After researching jobs over his holiday break in December, Kelvin decides to go ahead and apply to APS. These are the types of information that candidates provide in their application, which is a required step. We post our jobs early, so by January, Kelvin sees a science teacher position he's interested in for the next school year, and he goes ahead and adds that to his application. Our system is set up so that the next day, he automatically receives an email from Gallup asking him to complete an online assessment of teaching talent. Completion of the assessment is required, but there's no minimum cut score to be eligible for hire. Candidates who score well on their assessment automatically receive an email invitation to interview with the district on video. Kelvin's video interview link takes him to the HireView system, where anytime, 24/7, he can set aside about 30 minutes to answer 6 preloaded interview questions on video and complete 3 performance tasks, like a writing sample and a role play. These questions are designed around competencies prioritized in our definitions of teaching excellence. Principals then have access to watch the video interviews after the fact and then call their top candidates in for an interview at their school. They're trained to create a welcoming environment, use a diverse interview panel, and to have candidates do rigorous performance tasks like teaching a sample lesson. Once a principal selects a candidate that they want to recommend for hire, Human Resources performs the final check and calls and makes the verbal offer to the candidate. Kelvin receives his phone call and an offer letter in January and is able to complete all of his required new hire forms at home the next month, and then onboard in Human Resources in person later on in the spring when he's available. Because we hire early, Kelvin's able to go ahead and get connected with his colleagues and start getting his curriculum materials in June, and is well prepared for the 5-day new teacher orientation in July that is usually the week before all of the teachers come back. There is a 1-day district orientation for all new employee types, then 3 days just for teachers, then 1 day of campus orientation at their work site. Kelvin connects with experienced teachers in his grade level and subject area during the pre-planning week before students return. New teachers are supported by their campus-based mentor, 1 or more instructional coaches, a content or grade level team lead in their school, and their evaluator, who could be their principal or their assistant principal. By state procedure, all teachers receive an official orientation to the Teacher Keys evaluation system at the start of the school year. Even though Kelvin is an experienced teacher, he's still new to APS, so he'll receive some extra support. The schools and academics team does a great job training school leadership teams on providing feedback to teachers and calibrating on what excellent teaching looks like. Under the Teacher Keys criteria, Kelvin receives 6 formal observations throughout the school year, aligned to the state standards for teacher effectiveness. And as he becomes more experienced with the district, his formal observations reduce to 2 per year. As teachers grow and become stronger, we work on ways to keep them feeling engaged and expand their reach within the school to help other teachers. Kelvin is an example of someone who's doing well and having success with his students, so he becomes a 5th grade team leader and he gets a little pay bump. He does well learning how to coach other teachers, so he becomes a campus-based mentor for a new teacher in his building and he gets another pay increase. Within about 6 years, he's gained enough leadership skills that he plans to take advantage of some of our district-level leadership programs listed here. So Kelvin followed the most common way teachers are hired, but there are variations. For example, a candidate may be one of our resident teachers or student teachers who is hired on at the school where they trained without a video interview. Sometimes we may not know about a vacancy until June, so we could end up hiring a teacher a lot later than we hired Kelvin in late June or July. In Kelvin's case, he also followed a typical career pathway, but what happens if a teacher has some bumps in the road? So first, we do a lot of training with supervisors about the importance of coaching and supporting teachers as the first step for addressing low performance. A teacher who needs support may have a written plan in place with strategies designed to help them improve. There are many other strategies for supporting and developing teachers that Mr. Jernigan reviewed with you all in his presentation here in August. But if the support isn't working for some reason, what happens next depends on the classification of the employee. We have 3 different types of employee classifications. They're outlined on slide 33 in the appendix. Contracted employees, like teachers, have the most regulations for how we handle performance issues under state law and local policies. However, in APS, we do have a somewhat unique 90-day probationary period for new teachers that was implemented several years ago as part of our transition to a charter system operating model. During this period, the Fair Dismissal Act is waived, and that means that teachers may be exited with less steps, but there are still steps. It also means that a teacher may resign at will, which makes it somewhat more important for schools to support their new teachers to keep them through the duration of that 90-day period. Beyond the probationary period, our process for not renewing a contract is largely driven by state and local regulations, and it hasn't changed much in several years. There are internal deadlines for principals to submit their requests to Human Resources to non-renew a contract. We issue contracts in March, so at that time we go ahead and hold a contract for anyone who's still in question, that we're not sure about, maybe they're still working through their performance improvement plan. But we have to make a final decision by May. The role of the supervisor in this process is to follow the guidelines and to provide sufficient documentation to Human Resources, as well as treat employees fairly and be a good communicator. Human Resources then does the final check to make sure that the guidelines were followed, and then our legal department, Nelson Mullins, performs the second level of review before a final decision is made and communicated to the employee. The superintendent is the only one authorized to issue notices of proposed non-renewal to teachers. Then they're entitled to a hearing before the final vote is made by you all at the board level. Lastly, it doesn't happen very often, but there are also state consequences for a teacher who is rated as unsatisfactory for 2 years in a row. Like they may not be able to renew their state teaching certificate. Only about 3 to 5% of our teachers are rated in this category, and usually not for 2 years in a row, but I thought it was important to mention. With these processes in place for several years, we're seeing some growth and some current strengths. However, we also know that we have far to go. These are our focus areas for this school year to help us improve our talent outcomes. The slides in the appendix provide more detail about the processes I discussed and some of the data that we commonly use in this area. While there is still much heavy lifting to do in this area, we feel like we have a path forward. I would also like to thank our 3 executive directors from Human Resources who are here today. as well as our Director of Leadership Staffing and our Recruitment Operations Manager. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions that you may have or provide clarifying information at this time.
Thank you so much, Sky. Questions from the board? We have Aretta, Michelle, and Candace.
So in regards to recruiting, are you doing out to male teachers or to black male teachers?
Yes, we actually attend at least 2 events that I'm aware of that are specifically for recruiting male teachers of color. We also have a couple of individuals that will go to universities and work with student groups, specifically at Morehouse, where you have a traditionally high male population. We also have a group of individuals within the district, kind of a task force, who's working on recruiting and retaining male teachers. And those are most of the initiatives that are directly targeted at male teachers, because they are, as you can tell by some of the data in the appendix, they're a little underrepresented, and we'd like that to improve.
Thank you.
I'm curious to know, I've heard this term used in teaching, that a teacher is placed on a professional development plan, and that's to help them improve where they are weak. My question is, what do we do with good teachers to encourage them to get more professional development to make them even better, and even great teachers to encourage them to be even better? Do you know what I'm saying? Where's that continual kind of, I know you're doing your job really great, but I want you to push to the next level. And what is that called in teaching?
Right. So there's actually a part of the evaluation system where each teacher every year sets professional learning goals with their evaluator. And so each teacher has a professional learning plan that's different from a performance improvement plan that's part of their evaluation system. We also work with school leaders to encourage them. We've made most of the professional learning school-based, where they have a lot of choice. They'll do things like have some of their highest performing teachers lead some professional learning, and that is their professional learning. We also have teacher leader career pathways. There's a slide on that in the appendix that kind of is professional learning opportunities for teacher leaders or your higher performing teachers, where they're doing things like learning how to be a coach and a mentor, or they're going through the state's teacher leader endorsement program. So there is quite a bit of differentiation for professional learning, but everyone has a learning plan for the year.
Thank you. You always hear about that professional development plan, and you never really hear about what you just said. So I appreciate you walking me through it.
Yes.
Candace?
Thank you, Sky. I really appreciate the details here. I thought that was a really good idea to explain it through Kelvin. As to the recruiting piece, which I know, to be fair, was maybe not as much of part of this presentation, but what feedback, formal or informal, anecdotal or more organized, have you and your team received with respect to recruiting? And by that I mean what it sounds like, but also more specifically, what are we doing well to recruit good teachers, and what can we improve?
So we kind of look at it from multiple perspectives, because there's no one data point that we have that like measures accuracy of all of our recruiting. So there's a few things. So we look at what the events we go to in person, our attendance at those events, how many of those people who attended convert to applicants, how many of those applicants convert to hires. So that's a lot of the tracking around in-person events. And every year we look at which events we're getting the most return for our investment. We also do tracking within our application system of the recruitment source to tell which of our recruitment sources are most effective. I think there's a slide on that in the appendix. So if one recruitment source that we know is supposed to be really effective is showing as maybe not effective, we know we need to ramp up our efforts in that area. And then we also, it's not exactly recruitment, but we do a survey at the point of onboarding and human resources where we ask people about their recruitment and their onboarding experience, and we get their feedback about, you know, how pleasant it was, how efficient it was, and that kind of tracks back to recruitment, and we get some good data that way as well. And then we also, now that we've been doing this a few years, we're able to look back at teachers we hired 1, 2, 3 years ago, their recruitment source, and then how they're performing now in the district, and if we retained them or not. And we're starting to refine our recruitment strategies based on which ones are producing people who are performing and staying with us.
Thank you. How much do you think teacher salary has to do with that?
So in all of our surveys, that is one of the higher items of importance, especially in us being in a metro area. We've slipped a little bit in the past few years with teacher salaries. We're not the highest anymore. We're still up there. We're still competitive, but we're not the highest in the metro area anymore. But on both our exit interviews, people leaving the district, and in our surveys of new people coming in, salary is very important to both groups. And they actually rank base salary and stipends for teacher leadership roles equally as high. So the stipends and the investment we made this past year was kind of strategically in response to hearing that feedback.
If we were to, for whatever reason, come up with a budget such that teacher salary was dramatically increased, what would be your response to me just throwing that idea out there?
I would love teacher salaries to be dramatically increased, but it's not everything. You can pay them a lot of money and then put them in a work environment where they don't like to be, and it's a whole package. There's a lot of other conditions that need to come along with it, and there's also...
Like what are you thinking?
Yeah, like all of our surveys, and then of course educational research tells you they have to feel supported by their leader. We've done a lot of work, I'm looking at David behind me, on the past few years on retaining principals, developing principals, our internal leadership pipelines. So the manager and the broader administrative team are probably one of the most critical factors in keeping teachers once we've recruited and hired them. Then there are class size, their safety at work, their curriculum and materials to do the job, the technology that's available in their classroom. It's a whole gamut of things like that. But they rate a student discipline and their supervisor like as high up there as compensation.
What about, thank you, very helpful. To your point in the beginning about cost of living being a metro area, I mean, what have you heard or do you think about the ability to live in the district financially and thinking creatively about that?
Right. I think you had a comment on the last question, or do you want me to go ahead?
Thank you, Sky. I was just going to say on the dramatically increasing the salaries, while everything Sky said is true, agree, don't think we should absolutely do that. I think there's a whole different conversation about affordability, not just for teachers, but for support staff. So I know we're talking about teachers right here, but let's be clear, it is very hard to run APS the way we need to run it when you have so many staff members making salaries. Half of the staff is support staff, teachers are the other half. So it's kind of 3,000. So they're making less than teachers typically. So that is a challenge in and of itself, and we haven't finished, checking all the boxes on those groups. But for teachers who, even if you just said for the ones who currently live in Atlanta Public Schools, the idea that there would be something baked in as a base that increases with the cost of living in this city to be able to have affordable housing would be a huge step forward. Now, will it make a difference for kids? Maybe. But I don't think that's what the research says. I think we just have a different bucket of issues around what it takes to be able to keep a stable staff living and working in the communities where they serve. And I think that, for me, you were just starting to ask that second question, but that would be something that I think you would put in a base. And if you live in the city of Atlanta, if you want to live in this city, that perhaps there's something we put in to the salary to make it more feasible for someone who actually wants to live in the neighborhood where they teach, or somewhere in the city where their district actually is.
Right. Or even, non-salary ways to get at that, which was what I was kind of wanting to hear your thoughts on, if you have any. So what costs money, a mortgage, a rent? How can we look at that and find supplements or agreements, contracts with landlords, others? I don't know, you're nodding because you're probably light years ahead of me. So I want to hear your your thoughts on that.
Right. So we, of course, cannot control the price of housing in the city of Atlanta, but we can do. There are things within our control that can help out an individual in this situation. A few things. We've been partnering with Invest Atlanta for a few years now. We have a partnership with them. They come to our new employee orientations for individuals interested in home buying. We also have a financial assistance program through Operation Hope. We have a SunTrust individual in our building that works, they also come to new hire orientation, work with individuals on getting their credit to a point where they can afford to buy and paying down debts, and just a general affordability counseling. So those are a couple of things. And then on the rental front, we actually have started an intern, actually at the start of the school year, in the Office of Human Resources, is partnering with several community groups and creating a website and printed materials for hires looking for affordable rental properties in Atlanta. So you can go to Therrell Cluster and see the properties by affordability, by bedrooms, and negotiating discounts off of application fees, deposits, things like that for Atlanta Public Schools employees. When it comes to rent, the problem that teachers often run into is they make a little too much to qualify for some of the properties that are considered affordable housing, but they don't make enough to afford the full price rent. So they don't come into affordable housing until about 80% AMI, and that's a brand new teacher without much experience. The more experienced ones are even higher than that. So we're working very hard on it. And I also talk to Teacher Advisory Committee a couple of times per year on the issue, and they give us good feedback, and then we take their feedback and turn it into initiatives and lines of work.
Can I add something to this conversation, though? Because I think that the affordable housing conversation is something that is very important and we should be having, and something that as a city we should have had a very long time ago. But part of the issue we have is that most of the teachers are making the same assessments that all of us make. If we want teachers to live in our neighborhoods, the vast majority of our neighborhoods have affordable housing. The problem is those teachers have families, and they're looking at the community, looking at schools, looking at access to services, and they're thinking, this is not where I want to raise my family. So that's one of the big issues that we have, and it's a chicken and the egg issue. I mean, you can increase the pay, but where are they all going to move? What we really need is to start thinking about how to diversify the areas of where families are choosing to live. We're starting to see that in some of our clusters, in the Therrell cluster, in the South Atlanta cluster. We're starting to see Carver, Jackson come along, but many of our schools are in areas where there is affordable housing. In fact, people in those communities, when you say affordable housing, they're like, no, we don't need more affordable housing. We need development to bring services to our community. So I just wanted to put that side note in there, because that I think there's a question of whether we need to give teachers enough resources, which would be a lot of resources, to live in Midtown or wherever, or enough resources to live anywhere else in the city. And that, at that point, you start talking about two different conversations. And then that's where the community stuff comes in.
Right, and we, board member Olympiadis and I had a very good discussion with the Invest Atlanta board not too long ago on this topic, and we talked about walkability, good proximity to restaurants, the city, urban, hip life, good grocery stores, doctor's offices. Teachers want those things in pretty close proximity to where they live. And we're also really excited about the upcoming facilities master planning process and any outcomes of that may result in land or buildings that can be purposed for teacher housing.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's good. Isha, well, actually, Candace.
Yeah, if I can ask
Yeah.
one more question, and thank you for that point. I think it's like, do we get slammed by, salary, I hear you on that chicken egg, but, why make it, we have both issues, I think, if that makes sense. So I think a salary goes a long way to, in the interim, for us to wait for larger, more complicated systems to equalize themselves, which may or may not ever happen. Last question I have is, I heard you say student discipline is a factor that is also high here. And by that, high here meaning by feedback from teachers as to the recruiting process and their decision-making for coming to teach for APS. I assume that means that what it sounds like, which is that a teacher may be considering the culture of the school and the number of incidents or perceived incidences of student discipline, how much that she will have to focus her instructional time based on some perception of the school or reality on discipline rather than instruction. Is that a fair assessment? Assumption?
Yes, that's pretty close.
So that seems like a big one outside of this salary conversation that I would think we would want to focus on. And it is, in some ways, I think to Jason's point about how a lot of these things definitely intersect with each other, and all of the things that we're trying to do for our schools impact each other. And this is a good example of that. Do we see, is my question, like a difference, is it too early to tell now that we focus more on social and emotional learning and thinking more about discipline and thinking innovatively about that being an issue in itself, having an impact on this recruiting process? And if the answer to that is no, it's too early to see, which is probably what you're going to say, talk to me about what would be needed and your predictions for how those two might intersect, and in an ideal world where we'd be in that regard.
Right. So I will say we're not alone in this issue. All of our urban school peers, face similar situations, but we are somewhat unique in our focus for years now on social emotional learning, whole child, restorative practices, and we're seeing improvements in teacher retention, but we can't directly tie that to those things versus, other things that may be going on. Anecdotally, we hear people that apply to come here because they've heard APS is like so big on social emotional learning, or they see that emphasized in their hiring process. One of the things we've been working with principals on doing is making sure when they're interviewing teachers in their building, that's why I mentioned earlier teaching a model lesson, have them in the building, around the building, working with the kids, so you can see if they're a good fit or not. Don't hide the kids from them in the interview and then have them come in day one, with this surprise. So we try to make their interview experience immersive, so we make sure the people we're bringing in are a good fit and have the skill set that's needed. I believe new teacher orientation also covers quite a bit of classroom management, student discipline, and then just anecdotally, we hear from a lot of new teachers that they are getting a lot of support, like from mentors and peer teachers, and that the strategies on like the circles in the morning and are actually helping. It's twofold. It's with student discipline. It's also teacher mental health. So the things we're doing actually are helping us on two fronts, both with student discipline and the teacher's ability to emotionally work through all of those behaviors. So we feel like it's helping on both fronts, although I'm not going to be able to pin it down to just the SEL initiatives in the building.
A lot of good rich dialogue. I just wanted to thank you for this presentation. I know over the last few years we talked so much about strategy, compensation strategy, right sizing, and in regards to equitable things. So I really appreciate this other side of the higher retention process. I really do. And I think you pretty much had touched on one question I was going to ask was to talk about more of your presentation with the Invest Atlanta. I think that was just very important for them to hear that side from the school system in regards to development and movement that is happening. So I really appreciate you and Michelle really having that dialogue because I do think as we talk about some of the issues in regards to salaries, into salaries, where we rank, affordability, it is a larger, I firmly believe it's just a larger issue that multiple entities at the in the city need to be at the table to help us address. So to Jason's point, where we do have affordable areas throughout the city, it is going to take a lot more for me to convince people to, and we're starting to see it, right? So like in the Thero cluster, Adams Park, even, my neighborhood, Princeton Lakes, with Deerwood area, there's pockets of growth, but it's still like getting, you almost can't afford it. It's like, the houses are up there. So it's, I think it's a holistic conversation that needs to happen and for us to look at ways to continue to be at the table for those conversations. I know there were years where they had programs when I first started teaching the APS, like 17 years. I'm still young, you guys, but it has been 17 years ago, really, in 2000, like where there were, if you lived in the district, I know, if you lived in a district, it was like 50%. They do it for firefighters and police, but there was a lot of programs and initiatives to get teachers to live in the city at that time. And so just looking, see if those are ways that we could make sure that we're at the table and having your expertise and your team expertise to really continue to push that narrative. The only question I did have in regards to that is just understanding. You stated that we weren't no longer the highest paid district in the metro area. What is that ranking and what is what is that difference,
Right.
So I remember at one point in time it was like a $30,000, 40, like almost double distant, difference. But
Probably the best explanation of that is from the last budget commission meeting in the spring. I think it was the March one where we finalized teacher salaries, has several slides. But I would say we're in like the top 20-ish percent. We're in the top quartile.
Right. I was going to say that, yeah.
Yeah, we are still up there,
Right.
and it's not dangerously low. We have one of
Right.
the highest starting salaries.
Yeah.
But our
Okay.
scale particularly dips under some of the others in like the middle years, like 6 through 13. And you remember at the start of last year's budget planning, that was kind of our strategy heading into the budget planning, was to shore up our pay
Right.
scale in certain years.
Right, exactly.
Where we were
I remember
seeing
that. When people
competitiveness.
left, coming back.
But
you write down
then
those steps.
the X $1,000 per teacher kind of directive came through, and we had to go with a flat across the board. But it is, there's overall competitiveness, and then there's certain areas where we're seeing more serious issues than others. So we plan to have those conversations this year during the budget planning process on how to direct some funds to areas where we're lower than other districts, and then also combine it with some sort of across the board pay raises. But we're competitive. We're just not the top anymore.
Right. And I just think that's a good point to make, because we often hear, you don't pay us enough, or we take
We don't pay them enough
we
ever.
take comeback pay, like all of these dialogues about it, and just trying to get a relative understanding of where we are and what we need to do to move forward, and understand the implications of that. So if that is going to be a priority for us, making sure as the board we understand the financial considerations, give or takes and constraints that we would need to do to make that happen.
Right, and I think to Dr. Karstaffen's point earlier, all of those conversations have to also include our whole workforce.
Yes.
Because there have been years where teachers get raises and other people don't or don't get much. And so we're starting to like experience some issues in the rest of our workforce. So keeping everyone in mind in all of those conversations. And I think you'll see all of this come back up again during the budget planning process.
Thank you.
Michelle?
I just want to give you a shout out along with Erica Long when you did come to Invest Atlanta. Y'all had a great presentation. And I just want to say that what was great about it was that we moved away from affordable housing because you made it very clear that our teachers and a lot of our staff really need workforce housing. And so I think that for the Invest Atlanta team to hear that and to know that we don't have a lot of our staff living in the city, not just teachers, but a lot of our staff living in the city, and allowing them to understand the difference between the affordable housing and the workforce housing was really, really key. And I want to thank you both again for coming and presenting to the board.
Yes, you're welcome.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Are there any, Sky, any staff you have in the room? Any live? They waved earlier. Oh, Matt, you were hiding behind there. Hey, I saw some of the folks in the pictures, so thank you.
Great. We'll be joined by Erica Long, our Senior Policy and Government Affairs Advisor, to bring forward the legislative priorities for the 2020 General Assembly.
That's right. Thank you. Board Chair Estevez, Board Vice Chair Collins, our new board member Bolden. It is great to be here and present to all of you our draft 2020 legislative priorities. Of course, the General Assembly will be back in session in January, and we look forward to continuing our active role in advocating for the interests of this district before our legislature. Every year, we have in mind guiding principles that guide our work at the Capitol: adequate support for schools and teachers, strong public school options, and support for the charter system model, including autonomy, local control, and flexibility. We keep these guiding principles in mind as we work through each of the priorities for this upcoming year. You'll see here a recap of last year's session, where there were some positive steps, particularly with respect to protecting our tax base, with fighting off public school vouchers. There was no action on statewide school calendar mandates, which we were looking out for. Thankfully, that did not happen. We had encouraging outcomes with respect to annexation. We were able to work closely with the governor's office and the legislature on a couple of pieces of legislation that would have handled annexations in a way that is not appropriate to this district. And we don't anticipate many of those issues coming up again next year. We continue to work with educating our legislators on charter system flexibility, what that means for us as an operating model, and getting an understanding of how the current governor and administration support the charter system model. Even once the session ended in the spring, there is legislative work that happens throughout the calendar year. There have been several legislative study committees that have convened this summer and fall, meeting on issues important to our athletics department, including potential reform of GHSA. There has been a study committee on community schools. We expect to see some type of legislative recommendation that comes out of that study committee, as well as a Senate study committee on the educational achievement of African American children in Georgia. And we look forward to seeing their report and recommendations for legislative action over the next several weeks. We attended and monitored statewide teacher listening sessions that were convened by the governor, the governor's Office of Student Achievement, and the Georgia Department of Education across the state. And the governor participated in those and was very engaged in those discussions. He heard directly from teachers, from superintendents, and even from students about some of their concerns, particularly around assessments, around teacher recruiting, and concerns about teacher pay. We have heard many times from many different state officials that the remaining $2,000 teacher raise will likely come out of this session. But even as recently as this morning in a meeting with the Governor's Office of Student Achievement and the State Department of Education, districts made clear to the state that those raises for teachers, as important as they are, don't keep in mind other non-certified school district employees. So we're hearing a lot of common themes across school districts in the metro area. Here's a list of our draft 2020 legislative priorities. And you'll see highlighted in red changes from last year. Study committees that met throughout the summer touched on a range of issues, those directly related to K-12 education, as well as issues that are not related to the work of schools, but that impact students. So we want to be able to monitor the recommendations and legislative proposals that come out of those. And it's important that we set as a priority consistency and continuity with K-12 curriculum. We are hearing that there will be some changes to assessments coming out of the state. There is concern that we're testing too much. The governor heard that from districts across the metro area. We're pretty certain that there's going to be a move toward reducing the amount of assessments so that we're closer to federal minimum standards. And we will work with our neighboring districts and our peers to express our concerns about the amount of assessment. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Erica. Questions from the board? Ishay?
Just for clarity, in regards to our legislative priorities, so for number 5, right, like monitor recommendations of legislative study committees, and I know last year the focus on annexation, taxation, school calendars, and there was actually some movement that we did in those areas, those areas. What do you anticipate when you mention like issues relevant to K-12 education or into the school-age children? What are some of those things that you're hearing that could possibly surface as we prepare for a new legislative year?
I think we're going to see more movement on what's called the Tim Tebow Act, and that's legislation that allows students who are homeschooled to participate in athletic programs at schools. There are many, many issues with this scheme administratively in terms of how we handle not only our athletic programs but other district programs. We don't want to go down the slippery slope of families being able to pick and choose what school services they participate in. But there is a strong political community from the homeschool community that is not going to let this issue die down. There has been a legislative study committee on reform of the Georgia High School Association, and even though they were not convened for the explicit purpose of looking into homeschool athletics, at their latest meeting there was a large discussion of this issue. So I think it's something that will continue to pop up in the Capitol, and we will just be consistent in educating legislators about what it practically means to have a student come into a school to say participate on debate club or in the marching band, and they don't actually go to the school, and they have no relationship with the school other than that. We're also hearing and seeing a lot of work around the Community Schools Bill. You all may remember several years ago there was a former state senator who had a Community Schools Bill that had some movement. That has been picked up by another state senator. At a study committee meeting within the past couple of months, there was a big discussion about the community schools model and then work that we do with wraparound service providers such as Community in Schools in so many of our schools. But there is a strong portion of the community, particularly in Metro Atlanta, who would like to see movement toward a state definition of what a community school is. I don't know how far it will go because that's something that would definitely take some amount of resource allocation, but I don't think the concept itself will go away anytime soon.
I think to your point, in regards to that concept, because it was always brought to us almost every year, and I don't think there was any pushback on not agreeing. It was a resource allocation piece. I remember, you know, like seeing in you all and the team look into what that was like for us. It was, for one area was what was it? It was like 18 million or $20 million investment. So I would be curious to see what's the conversation of resource allocation.
And
Piece.
it's a good topic. In terms of statewide issues, it's kind of difficult to imagine how this would work in areas outside of the metro area. And I've not heard a lot of discussion yet about whether there's interest from more rural parts of Georgia in developing these types of wraparound supports and partnership.
And then one other follow-up question to that. For that same recommendation, this is a follow-up from this previous year. So, of course, the conversation in regards to the school calendars piece and this push as far as starting a little later and things like that, and we did that this year. And I know I think, I don't know if you all have, but been hearing some feedback as far as the pros and cons of us starting later in this year, and the trade-off that was, right? And so just wanted to see, is that something that we would need to revisit? Is that something that you see potentially continuing, from a statewide piece, or even our local delegation on a push for that? You know, you never realize how major these decisions are until it's actually in place, and so.
Yeah, well, the state level discussion was a bit different from our local discussion as a district.
Yeah.
If you think back to the summer before last, when there was a study committee around school calendars, the makeup of that committee was very business and industry focused, and they were thinking more from their perspective. But they did not have an understanding of local issues that we have to keep in mind as we're building out our local district calendars. So I think it's something that we can learn from. We have heard feedback from our teacher advisory committee about, concerns about having that long stretch at the beginning part of the school year, and there's not a fall break that teachers are accustomed to. I think this year we can definitely collect some data on teacher absences and see, if this is an actual problem or just a perceived problem. But I do think that overall our families are happy that you all set school calendars with 3 school years in mind so that they can plan things out long term. From the state legislature, I can't say yet whether we will see more movement around mandating school calendars. That bill was brought up toward the end of last year's session. It had one person sign on to it, and there was not really much movement beyond the convening of the study committee.
As always, Erica, thank you so much for all that you do here and across the street or across a couple streets at the Gold Dome. It's always a fun-filled session, and I'm sure this one will be lots of fun for all of us. But under your leadership, I know that we will get through it just fine. So thank you.
Great. Angela King-Smith, Chief Engagement Officer, with an update on the new 5-year strategic plan.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Karstafen, Chair Estevez, Vice Chair Collins, and all of the members of the Board of Education, as well as our new board member, Ms. Bolden. Today, I will provide an update on the 2020-2025 strategic plan process, as well as the engagement efforts to date. I'll review progress to date, as well as outline the questions that were reviewed last week during the November 1st Board of Education retreat. On Friday, we provided a set of questions for the board to review, and the board provided the necessary guidance to continue the APS strategic plan development process. Outlined here on the slides are the priority areas identified by the APS Board of Education during the September 2019 retreat. We asked the question, what are your priority areas? And you identified the following items as critical priorities during the September strategic planning retreat. Close the achievement gap and address equity. Focus on early childhood and literacy. Empower effective school leaders and staff. Identify, prioritize, and meet the needs of students and schools, and continue to strengthen district and school culture. During your budget parameters discussion held on October the 17th, you identified several multi-year strategic priorities that you were considering. And these themes connect to the work of strategic planning. And they include thinking about the district will make investments to eliminate the racial achievement gap. The district will make investments in teacher and staff well-being initiatives to support staff recruitment and retention. The district will make investments in the alignment with overall district strategic plan to support reading and literacy initiatives. And the district will make investments in alignment with the overall district strategic plan to support math initiatives. At the retreat on Friday, you all we asked the following questions, and we asked for your guidance regarding the following questions. Should the mission be adopted or adapted to or remain the same? Which theory of action most aligns with your vision for the future of Atlanta Public Schools? And what timeline allows for the development of the plan and stakeholder and community feedback? You provided the following guidance around the question around the mission. The board recommended a revision to the existing mission, and the text is denoted on the slide. It reads, through a caring culture of equity, trust, and collaboration, in bold, every student will graduate ready for college and career. We also had a lengthy conversation around the theory of action. We asked you all, what do you believe most aligns with your vision for the future of Atlanta Public Schools? And we also highlighted that a theory of action is the belief in what you believe will lead to long-term success or your major change levers. And so you answered the question by working on a theory of action, which is highlighted on the slide, and you all provided the guidance of the theory of action. If we define criteria against which schools and the district are measured, and empower schools to set goals and priorities and equip them with the capacity and equitable resources, and assess progress, engage stakeholders, identify success, and commit to a timeline and effective support strategies for continual improvement, then we will be positioned to act with urgency and revise strategies to take action when criteria are not being met or showing significant progress, so that every student, regardless of background, will attain the skills, knowledge, and tools to succeed in college and career. You also provided feedback regarding priorities, and so I will be working on those priorities so that we can share them with the community based off your feedback on November the 1st. You also, we asked you what timeline allows for the development of the strategic plan, stakeholder and community feedback. The board agreed on an adjusted strategic timeline for the strategic plan. A draft plan will be shared with the community during the November community meetings. The draft plan will be provided to the Board of Education in December, with a final plan being submitted to the board in January 2020. And then finally, outlined are the regional community conversations that will continue the conversations that we started earlier this semester. On November the 11th, we will hold a meeting at Brown Middle School. On November 13th, we will hold a meeting at John Lewis Invictus Academy. On November the 18th, we will hold a meeting at Sylvan Hills Middle School, and then on November the 21st at Sutton Middle School. You will recall during my previous report outs to you that we were going to do APS table talks. Those are in progress. We had some held last week, and there are some that are being held this week to allow for parents who normally do not have an opportunity to come out to large community meetings for them to engage in the conversation. And then we will continue to engage with the Board of Education. We have a board retreat scheduled for November the 14th. And this concludes my report today. I will take any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Angela. Any questions from the board? I think it's because of all the great work that happened on Friday. I don't know. I think most of us are Many brains were fried, but we think it was good work. So we appreciate your patience and that of your team. Ishay?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I mean, just really good work. I think we did a lot of work on Friday, and just to thank you for your recap. And hopefully it was, summative to the community on the work that we did with the mission vision and, overlapping the theory of action work. But I still have an out-of-body experience right over there.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
With that,
Thank
you, Dr. Angela King-Smith.
Thank you.
For that.
Finally, I'll ask Lisa Bracken, the Chief Financial Officer, to present the fiscal year 2020 monthly financial update, as well as the 2021 budget parameters and calendar draft for consideration in the legislative meeting for first reading.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Dr. Karstafen. Today I'll be presenting 4 topics related to finance. First, I'll provide you with the financials for FY 2020 for all activities occurring in the months of July through September. Next, I'll present to you the first quarter report to student activity fund accounts. Third, I'll be presenting you a series of budget adjustments. And finally, I'll provide a brief overview of the resource and expenditure budget parameters for FY 2021. With the next 4 slides, we will cover the FY 2020 financials for the first 3 months of the fiscal year. So far, we have collected about 20% of the total resource budget. We are currently tracking well ahead of pace for local revenue collections, as tax bills did go out significantly earlier this year than last year, although the largest collections have occurred over the month of October and will be reported in more detail at next month's meeting. On slide 5, we see the budget to actual expenditures so far for FY 2020. Spending in all functions is appropriate for this point of the fiscal year. Slide 6 represents the current spending trend for FY 2020 against the FY 19 trend. While there are some fluctuations function by function, the overall spend is on pace with and slightly lagging the previous year's spend. Please remember the timing of large expenditures from one month to the next can greatly impact the percentage spend against the previous year, and we'll continue to monitor, and if corrections are needed, we'll be presenting those as recommendations as part of our mid-year adjustments. On slide 7, you'll find the summary for the FY 2020 first quarter student activity funds report. So far, schools have collected slightly less than $1 million in activity funds and spent about 75% of those funds. FY 20 first quarter revenues are basically flat from FY 19, and expenditures are up roughly $110,000 due primarily to an increase in the purchase of athletic supplies, uniforms, and T-shirts, and outstanding yearbook payments. Revenue and expenditures are in alignment with the adopted budget for FY 2020. The detailed report can be found in Agenda Item 11.06. I'm bringing 4 budget adjustments today to you. For the general fund, we are requesting an increase of $2,455,333 to revenue and expenditures for the Consolidated Fund 150 from Title I for school leveling and high school summer remediation and summer schools. Also, a decrease of $6,226 to revenue and expenditures for the CTAE Apprenticeship State Grant, and an increase of $547,775 to revenue and expenditures for Charter School Facility State Grant. For special revenue, we are decreasing both revenue expenditures by $1,278,808 for Title I academic achievement. This is a true-up of actual allocations, and we did not anticipate a change in services based on this budget amendment. Additional details for these adjustments can be found in Agenda Item 9.01. Agenda Item 11.07 includes the detailed information report for special revenue adjustments less than $1 million that have occurred in October. So with that, we leave FY 2020. We move into FY 2021, planning for next year. So my final section will cover the FY 2021 budget parameters, which are before you this evening for first read. As a reminder, the board sets annual budget parameters to guide budget development, including revenue assumptions, fund balance targets, and expenditure goals. We discussed these parameters in detail at the October Budget Commission, and we will finalize them this month on November 21st. The current draft resource parameters are to alleviate pressures from the general fund and taxpayers while supporting the ongoing transformation of APS. We will do this by maximizing all available funding streams, including federal grants and other special revenue. continuing to identify grant-generating opportunities, protecting the tax base through maximized benefit to the district of all current TADs, continuing the scrutiny of tax abatements, and supporting the coterminous boundaries of the district with the City of Atlanta. Seeking additional business, philanthropic, and community partnerships, and assessing the required millage rate. Also, the district will maintain or grow the fund balance, preferably through the already negotiated TAD IGA, to better prepare the district for a potential economic downturn. And lastly, where possible, the district will leverage the facilities master planning process to identify potential revenue streams or one-time resources to restore fund balance. The first expenditure parameter serves to encapsulate many of our past initiatives and priorities as we commit to continuing funding those. The turnaround strategy, the charter system operating model, and core components of signature programming, cluster, and flexibility funds through SSF, the Atlanta College and Career Academy, the talent strategy to include recruiting, developing, retaining, and promoting high-quality staff through pipeline development, professional development and coaching and career pathways, including leadership development. A multi-year compensation strategy that positions APS competitively in the market and supports the retention of high-quality employees, and continued investments in the general employee pension plan. Also, as a continued priority, the district will allocate resources pursuant to the district's definition of equity and in support of the charter system model through the Student Success Funding Formula, or SSF. Also, the district will develop a multi-year resource plan to accompany the 5-year strategic plan to ensure overall sustainability of those initiatives. As new priorities for FY 2021, the district will establish an evaluation strategy, including the structures and mechanisms by which programs or processes will be measured for effectiveness to inform future resource investment decisions. We will evaluate and address inefficiencies within central office through an ongoing process improvement initiative and develop a detailed line item budget for the central office departments to support the long-term goal of creating a more effective and efficient central office and in alignment with the GFOA's best practices in school-based budgeting. Also, the district will work through the budget development process to identify, where possible, current spend tied to those priorities that surface through the strategic planning process to establish a baseline so that informed decisions can be made in the multi-year resource plan and funding can be adjusted as appropriate. And lastly, and most importantly, the district will invest in the first-year initiatives and that are identified in the 2020-2025 strategic plan. This leads to my final slide that you just saw in Angela's presentation. These are the FY 2021 multi-year priorities as discussed at the October Budget Commission meeting. We discussed these and the pressures around sequencing of events. This year, we had the conversation around chicken or egg as we develop parameters at the same time that we're developing a strategic plan. So while these themes on this slide surfaced as board priorities in the parameter ranking exercises, I believe that specific budget commitments must wait to be prioritized until after the adoption of the strategic plan and supporting initiatives. Themes pending completion of strategic planning process include investments to eliminate the racial achievement gap, investments in teacher staff well-being initiatives, investment in alignment with the overall district strategic plan to support reading, literacy, and or math initiatives. The final budget timeline includes many opportunities for public and community engagement, as well as many opportunities for the administration to engage with this board to build a budget that is representative of the needs, strategies, and goals of the district. This includes 8 Budget Commission meetings, 7 Budget and Finance Advisory Committee, or BFAC meetings. 2 of those meetings were actually opening for the public this year. We are planning one for November 14th at the Cohen Building at 6:00 p.m. We encourage anybody to come out to that meeting to discuss student success funding model and plans for next year. And then also 4 regional meetings across the various clusters and 2 public hearings before the budget is finalized on June 1st, 2020. The final budget calendar is also included in agenda item 9.03 for your consideration for first read tonight. So that concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions you may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Appreciate that. Questions from the board? Another good session with the board. What was that, 2 weeks ago? Mm-hmm. Where board members spent a lot of good time going through this information. So hopefully that's paid dividends, and we'll continue on after today's vote. Thank you, and thank you to your team as well.
Absolutely.
For all that y'all do. With that, I think there is reason, Madam General Counsel, to retreat into executive session.
Mr. Chair, yes, the board needs to discuss some student matters.
Thank you. Is there a motion to enter into executive session to discuss matters involving student discipline? Been properly moved by Ishay Collins, seconded by Candace Wood Jackson. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We will now retreat into executive session. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone again who spoke tonight during today's community meeting. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us about your concerns, and thank you for your support of APS's efforts to ensure our students graduate ready for college and career. Before we move into the legislative part of our meeting, I want to welcome again the newest board member to the Atlanta Board of Education, Ms. Aretta Balden, who represents District 2. Let's give her a round of applause. We all, as a board, look forward to working with you in the months to come. With that, I'll move on to a few additional announcements. First, last month we learned about the passing of former state senator Leroy Johnson, who was 91. Senator Johnson served in the Georgia State Senate from 1963 to 1975, and at the time was the first black legislator to be elected to the General Assembly since Reconstruction. He was instrumental to the integration of the state capitol and its facilities, and Senator Johnson was a graduate of the historic Booker T. Washington High School and taught there for 4 years before he attended law school. An attorney and former candidate for Atlanta mayor, Senator Johnson played a number of roles in the civil rights movement here in Atlanta. Our city and state are better off because of the leadership and service of State Senator Leroy Johnson. We felt it was fitting to recognize him here now and honor him with a moment of silence. Thank you. Moving forward, November is National College Application Month. The goal of the month is to provide all Georgia high school students, seniors in particular, with the opportunity to apply to college using georgiacollege411.org, with a focus on providing assistance to first-generation and underrepresented students as they navigate the college application process. There are events planned at nearly all of our high schools. Also this month is School Psychologists Awareness Month, and the National Association of School Psychologists has designated November 11th through November 15th as National School Psychology Awareness Week. This year's theme is, quote, "Find Your Focus," which can have a variety of meanings such as paying attention, being able to see an idea more clearly, identifying an area of interest, or being persistent and determined in one's effort. Next, it's also critical that we have our families involved in the APS journey of transformation. November is a great time to consider how we get our families involved because it is Family Engagement Month, and National Parent Involvement Day is on Thursday, November 21st. Every year in the middle of American Education Week, which is the week of November 18th through November 22nd, the National Education Association, NEA, honors education support professionals, and recognizes the contributions they make to public education, from instructional assistants and para-educators to security guards, technology specialists, and skilled trade workers. Today's support professionals provide invaluable services that enable students to learn in positive and supportive environments. Without them, we simply would not be able to provide a quality public education. So thank you to our support professionals. Finally, during our work session this afternoon, Erica Long, Senior Policy and Government Affairs Advisor, provided a thorough report on our priorities for when state legislators meet again in January. For our stakeholders who just arrived or are just tuning in to our meeting, I want to provide a quick summary. Our legislative priorities for the 2020 year include: 1, provide adequate, stable education funding, including continued full funding of QBE and updating of school funding formula. 2, protect the Atlanta Public Schools property tax base to support quality instruction for all students, including by restricting the issuance of tax abatements to projects that would not be developed otherwise. 3, maximize district autonomy and flexibility over fiscal management issues. 4, prioritize early childhood education to provide aligned quality programs to all students. 5, monitor recommendations of legislative study committees on issues relevant to K-12 education and the interests of school-age children. 6, urge adoption of approach to education legislation that supports district move to autonomy and flexibility. 7, strengthen the teacher pipeline and teacher quality by providing resources for recruitment and retention. And 8, prioritize continuity and consistency throughout the K-12 curriculum. Thank you so much to Erica and her team for their work on those priorities, and we look forward to working with them to ensure that we have a productive legislative session for APS, on behalf of APS. I now invite Dr. Korstarfin to make her own remarks.
Great, thank you so much. Good evening, board members and community members. During our work session today, we heard 5 presentations from the administration. You just heard the recap of the legislative priorities. Among our other presentations, we heard a report from the Superintendent's Community Equity Advisory Committee, which has just started meeting since the approval of the new equity policy by the board last school year. The committee will receive an update on all of our academic indicators. They've already been participating in the strategic planning process, and they'll also, over the next school year, work on the budget and the facility master planning work as well. In the meantime, we're going to continue our work in equity around student success formula, the budget in particular, and some of the other areas of disproportionality, discipline, and we've also talked extensively about the achievement gap. The committee has begun the work on a biannual equity plan that ensures that all students are being provided equitable access to excellent educational opportunities. And so, again, it will still be a full calendar year in November of 2020 when the board sees the complete plan, but the initial work will start during the school year. We then heard from Sky Duckett, the Chief Human Resources Officer, who did a presentation on recruiting, developing, retaining the best talent suited for the district. And that was a drill down on talent management, where we've heard much broader reports. But in that report, it is outlining how we define excellence for teachers in particular, and how we create the kind of culture that is focused on children. We also heard from the Chief Engagement Officer, Angela King-Smith, regarding the work toward the 2020-2025 strategic plan. She explained the process for how we'll complete the plan and the work that the board has ahead of them through the end of the calendar year and voting for approval in January. The last presentation was regarding the budget for 2020 and the 2021 budget process. including budget parameters. The CFO, Lisa Bracken, provided the monthly financial update along with the summary of preliminary work toward the fiscal year 21 budget. She provided you with the current draft of budget parameters for both resources and expenditures. On the research side, we want to alleviate pressure from the general fund and taxpayers by maximizing our special revenue opportunities, protecting our APS tax base, and growing partnerships and leveraging the facility master planning process to identify any potential revenue streams to restore fund balance. On the expenditure side, we'll plan to continue investments around turnaround, our charter system operating model, the Atlanta College and Career Academy talent strategy, and the multi-year compensation strategy and the general employee pension. Through the student success funding model, which is anchored in equity, where there are weights for different demographics in the district, such as poverty or special needs, we will allocate. We will continue to allocate in that way, but under the new definition of equity, we'll push more to drive resources where students and schools need it the most, drive innovation and autonomy with accountability so that principals and GO teams can make decisions aligned with their school needs. As always, the budget will align with the 5-year strategic plan. Wrapping up this strategic plan will put the finishing touches on the budget parameters. We'll continue to evaluate those structures and mechanisms to improve effectiveness and root out inefficiencies where possible. To reiterate the effort for the multi-year strategic priorities for the budget, some themes are emerging around eliminating the racial achievement gap, investing in teacher and staff well-being, also supporting recruitment and retention of the staff members with highest quality outcomes, investments in alignment with the strategic plan, especially around reading and literacy, and to make investments where we are also supporting math initiatives. As we discussed on Friday during the board's most recent retreat, those things may shape up and change a little bit, but that's where you left it in your last Budget Commission meeting. I will note that the budget timeline and parameters are part of discussion and action later in this meeting, so you'll be taking your preliminary action and allowing for those draft parameters to have a first reading. We are ending on a couple of things for my presentation today. First is around the state of the district. We're having our 6th annual State of the District. I want to extend a final invitation to everyone who would like to attend. We will hold this address this Thursday, November 7th, at the newly renovated Harper Archer Elementary School in the Douglas Cluster. This school was part of our turnaround and transformation strategy, and it included a lot of changes in leadership, staff, investments in programming, and including consolidating 2 schools, Fane Elementary School with Towns Elementary School, to create the new Harper Archer Elementary School. For this event, the theme is EPIC, the true tales of the APS journey of transformation and our quest for excellence. As always, we'll showcase our beautiful students as I shared the state of the district on our mission to graduate students ready for college and career. We'll start the day with a ribbon cutting, which is always fun. We did one last year at Walden Fields in the Grady Cluster. This year, it'll be at Harper Archer. So come early at 10 a.m. for the ribbon cutting, and the State of the District will start promptly at 11 a.m. Finally, I want to thank everyone who participated in the annual AP Yes Awards last week, which were held at the Delta Flight Museum, our first super fancy location. And so we just want to appreciate Delta so much for letting us use that beautiful venue and all of the bells and whistles that come with it. We celebrated great teachers, great principals, great partners, and the people who put students and schools first. And of course, our amazing, talented, beautiful students, again, who always bring the thunder and make the show and the experience absolutely worth it. We presented the district-wide Excellence in Teaching Award. The winner was Chrissy Davis, the orchestra director at Grady High School, who has taught at Grady for the past 2 years, but has been teaching for 15 years. Before teaching at Grady, Ms. Davis taught at Sutton Middle School and served as the lead middle school orchestra teacher for APS. Under her direction, the Sutton Middle School Orchestra performed in the National Band and Orchestra Festival at Carnegie Hall in New York in spring of 2016, and I'm pretty sure I attended that one. I just I can't remember all the different ones, but I'm pretty sure I attended one of them. That may have been it. The Principal of the Year, Yolanda Washington of Coretta Scott King Young Women's Leadership Academy, has been a guiding force at that school for the last 3 years. Under her leadership, CSK has been recognized nationally by Good Morning America. I was there for that too. Has received STEM certification and most recently celebrated a 100% graduation rate. Among our other awards, the Assistant Principal of the Year, Joy Anton from Inman Middle. Students' first winner, Michelle Birdsong Walker, our Family and Community Engagement Specialist at Dunbar Elementary School. School's first winner, Sarah Womack, Fine and Performing Arts Coordinator, and District-wide Partner of the Year, Atlanta Volunteer Lawyer Foundation. So it was a great night for everyone. You will see some of those people and other amazing talent across APS on Thursday. So please continue to celebrate with us this year. There are a lot of great things going on in APS. And Mr. Chair, that concludes my remarks for this evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Starfin. Would you please present the consent agenda?
Yes, sir. And before I submit the consent agenda items, which are 5.01 through 8.01 to the board for approval, there are a couple of things we wanted to highlight. 5.03, we're asking the board to make a revision to the district's charter school policy. It will bring clarity to the charter petition process and mandates an annual report to the board on charter school performance, and also makes clear that the overall facility needs of the district must be taken into account when making unused district facilities available to charters. Today's action by the board is first reading of this proposed revision. Item 5.50 deals, no wait, 5.05, yeah, sorry, thank you, deals directly with a charter school partner. We are recommending the approval of the charter renewal petition for Kandezi Schools. Kandezi operates 2 K through 8 charter schools in APS, Kandezi Westlake, which opened in 2010, and Kandezi Old Fourth Ward, which opened in 2015, where we expanded seats for this charter school. Kandezi plans to maintain its 900 student enrollment cap and its current attendance zones. They also did receive their state audit, which did meet the standards of the state and the district. I also want to note that Kandezi Schools have met or made progress toward all of its academic performance goals and continues to comply with all financial and operational requirements. The current term of this contract expires on June 30th, 2020, but its renewal would extend for 5 years. Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm pleased to submit consent agenda items 5.01 through 8.01 for board approval.
Thank you so much. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda 5.01 through 8.01?
So moved.
It's been properly moved by Cynthia Briscoe Brown. Is there a second? Seconded by Candace Wood Jackson. Is there discussion? Ishay?
I just had one, let's make sure everybody can hear me. I just had one, not necessarily concern, but just one proposed revision for first read in regards to item number 5.04, which is the revisions to the actual charter process. Not so much in regards to Dr. Kostarfin's synopsis, but more in regards to merging or synthesizing the support that applicants would need to show in regards to petitioning. And so I have already proposed that to the policy review committee for consideration at this month's committee meeting, the third Thursday of the month.
For clarity, that is 5.03.
Yes, sorry, 5.03.
And that's fine. That's why we do first read on policies. And Ishay and I will continue to work together on that, and we'll present that as part of the policy review committee meeting on Thursday, November 21st.
Great. Sounds good. Any other comments, questions? All right. Let us open the vote. Moving on to discussion and action. 9.01, which is the monthly budget adjustment. Is there a motion to approve 9.01?
Second.
Been properly moved by Nancy Meister, seconded by Cynthia Briscoe Brown. Any discussion? Open the vote. Thank you. The next item is 9.02, naming recommendation for the new Grady Cluster Middle School. The recommended action is to waive first reading and approve the recommendation, which is to name the school David T. Howard Middle School. Shout out to board members Leslie Grant and Michelle Olympiadis for chairing the naming committee. Is there a motion? It's been properly moved by Michelle Olympiadis, seconded by Ishay Collins. Any comments, questions? Please open vote.
I was more intentional about
Okay. Thank you. Next item is 9.03, adoption of the FY 2021 budget timeline and parameters. This is the first reading. Can I get a motion to approve? Probably moved by Nancy Meister, seconded by Ishay Collins. Any discussion? Please open the vote. All right. Next out is report out from executive session. Madam General Counsel, can you please take the lead on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I request a motion that the Atlanta Board of Education accept the hearing officer's findings of fact and recommendation in student appeal number 2019-13.
Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Been properly moved by Cynthia Briscoe Brown. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Candace Wood Jackson. Any discussion? Please open the vote. I think it went away. Okay, moving on to the next one.
Mr. Chair, I request a motion that the Atlanta Board of Education accept the hearing officer's findings of fact and recommendation in Student Appeal number 2019-14.
So moved.
It's been properly moved by Cynthia Briscoe Brown. Is there a second?
It's
Seconded by Isha Collins. Is there any discussion? Please open the vote. Next.
And finally, in Student Appeal number 2019-15, I request a motion that the Atlanta Board of Education uphold the decision of the hearing officer in part and modify it in part as discussed in executive session.
Is there a motion?
so moved.
Properly moved by Cynthia Briscoe Brown, seconded by Isha Collins. Any discussion? Please open vote.
Modified in part.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Madam General Counsel. We'll move on to a report out from the community meeting. Vice Chair Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight, we heard from 16 community meetings at tonight's meeting, starting with Grady student that expressed the importance of ensuring equity, equity criteria in the superintendent search, and wants more student voice and participation in meetings, forums, and that we can encourage student feedback in the process. There was also expressed concern for high mobility of our students and their families, and the possibility of APS tracking that mobility and stability to ensure success for our students. We also heard from Black on Purpose TV that expressed concerns and also frustration with roadblocks in city processes and the use of our facilities. There was expressed concerns and also shared explicit literacy scores and the need to correct these issues as we address in our strategic planning process and moving forward. There was more clarity. There was demand for more clarity on the superintendent search process, and specifically with community engagement, and to ensure that we are being very clear about the process, the next steps, and how community members can continue to be engaged. We heard from the Washington High School Alumni Association in regards of not wanting to be a part of any pilot program to add parks or any changes to the infrastructure at Booker T. Washington High School. There was a welcome to our newest board member, Aretta Balding, and a farewell to Dr. Kostarfin. In regards to in regards to her contract extension, there was questions about the quality and the quality and the facilitator of the community feedback on the superintendent search process, and also again another expressed concern to ensure that we have community engagement in the superintendent search process. There was also additional advocacy for the community schools model, and we consider that moving forward within our charter process and also our strategic planning. Atlanta Thrive parents thank board members for attending the Parent Summit on Saturday, October 26th, and urge the board to be more accountable, but also to set the bar and the matrix for the measurements for schools moving forward. The summit allowed parents to understand CCRPI and dive deeper into understanding the progress and also the failures of their schools. There was a strong concern in regards to the homeless the need to address the homeless population within APS, and the frustration, also the correlation of the CCRPI scores into that problem. Additionally, we heard advocacy for charter expansion and school choice, but also concluded that there was a need for uniformity in those conversations. We ended tonight's community meetings expressing with a recap of Sky Duckett's presentation on teacher affordability, but also our hiring retention process, but also in regards to APS stances on school safety. the continuous need for APS to stance on school safety on the heels of the upcoming legislative session. And that is the report out for tonight's legislative meeting.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Collins. We will now move on to a report out from board committees. Is there any report out from policy?
Yes. We will be having a meeting on Thursday, November 21st at 8:30 in the morning, at which we will discuss the policies that we have on first read tonight. I would also like to publicly thank the National Center for Civil and Human Rights and Emory University for inviting me to speak last month at their forum on equity in education. They asked for a presentation on our equity policy. And the presentation was well received, and we have been approached by a couple of school districts for information about using our policy as a model. So we are getting some positive feedback from our work, and again, want to thank the Equity Task Force and those who worked so hard to get that policy up and running last spring.
Great, thank you. Budget?
Yes, the Budget Commission met on the 17th. Thank you, Jason, for sitting in for me as I was unable to make it. But they worked to prioritize and finalize the resource and expenditure parameters, which we discussed tonight. Dr. Karstafen went into them in detail in her remarks, so there's no need to redo that. Next Budget Commission meeting is November 21st.
Thank you. And just to make it official, I announced this during the last budget committee, but I'll make it official now, though. I am appointing Aretta Balden to the budget committee, which makes it a complete committee at this point for the first time, and a complete board, actually, for the first time in about 10 months. So congratulations, Aretta. You will be joining Michelle and Nancy on the budget committee. Is there any report out from board conferences?
On. There we go. Okay. All right. Now I'm on. Okay. Let me back up. Leslie Grant, Erica Mitchell, and myself attended the Council of Great City Schools annual conference that was held in Louisville, Kentucky. It's always a packed agenda. You start first thing in the morning, and they take you through the day. We had the opportunity to attend various sessions. I attended one on equity that was very well done with the gentleman from Jefferson City and how they're addressing equity specifically and supporting African American males. We also attended, all three of us did go to the Education Week, held a reception that we attended, and we gave a lot of feedback on what board members find useful in that publication. As y'all know, that's a publication that talks about education, and it has all kinds of relevant articles for teachers and principals and administrators, and they were kind enough to ask what piques the board's interest. So we time talking with them. One evening, Erica Mitchell and Dr. Miles presented on a session Friday morning specifically about our policy that the Policy Review Committee brought to this board a few months back on the sex trafficking. It was an incredibly well-attended session. There was really a lot of positive feedback with a request that they present again at another conference so that more people can attend that particular session. I think we had Louisville's lovely. They had nice little things for us to do so that we could get to see the town a bit. And overall, it's always great because you get to have the opportunity to talk with other board members from urban districts, listen to their challenges, which are very similar to our own, and learn about best practices that are being done in districts throughout the nation. So I'll let Erica add if she would like to add anything. You're good? Okay.
I'm good. You summed it up.
Okay, all right.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Michelle. 7:16. Wow. Roberta, you want to say anything? No, I'm kidding. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved. I'm like, we on the roll. Let's go.
Properly moved by Erica Mitchell. Thank you for moving. And then seconded by, that's Isha Collins over here. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.